everyone. It's really great to be here. It's been an amazing day full of talks and very inspiring things that we've heard so far. So firstly, thank you to the Hatch team for organizing this incredible day and for having me here as well. Yeah. So not to dwell on, the past after a day full of really amazing days, but I just wanted to take a moment to figure out how we arrived at this place where we are rejoicing in having a face-to-face conversation. So 2020 was meant to be this, year with a nice ring to its name, but it ended up being the most cringeworthy of memes that will probably outlast them all. And of course, it showed us what's broken about our work culture. We started to really think about what progress means for us and why we're doing what we're doing, a lot of different questions. And of course, then came the Great Resignation, which was sort of boiling over from years past. Sorry. And simultaneously at that time, it seemed like there were a bunch of design jobs exploding, which I couldn't quite explain why. And of course, companies were trying to create the sense of stability and thinking about what this new wave of work culture should be like. And suddenly, yet all of that unraveled again over the last 3 months. My LinkedIn is definitely full of all kinds of news. So if there's basically anything I've learned, or maybe we've all learned from the last few years, it's that this sort of control is really an illusion. And uncertainty makes us really, really uncomfortable because we have to take uncomfortable choices. And one of that could be that you decide to just ride it out and duck the change coming at you. Or we try to, or we try to just jump in and embrace whatever's coming and just see where we come out the other end. So this fabled journey of the person who sort of left his corporate job and started a farm, it sounded spectacular a few years ago, but I think at this point that seems more and more a reality. I think even before this whole thing began, we were already hearing about this episodic career, the idea of a non-linear career made up of many pivots and micro-careers due to job markets, a lot of different fluctuations. And as Farai Chireya put it really nicely, we are living in the age of the episodic career. Sorry. And I remember back in the day when I was starting out, I was really scraping the bottom of the barrel to find pieces of experience to put together to show that I was experienced on my CV. And there was this sweet spot I found where that actually matched the expectations of the industry. But guess what? That lasted 15 minutes, and now we're on to the next thing again. So this idea of restarting and having to react to change I've had a special relationship to it. Personally, I grew up in India, and I moved 6 cities before I hit 20. And since then, from then to now, I've already lived and worked in 3 continents, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing similar things. And for my work, I started in fashion design, then moved to graphic design, and now user experience. And now I'm really standing at this open canvas of what could be a hybrid of all of it. I have to say, while all of this happened, I'll be really honest that I didn't always just embrace what came at me. I just let it wash over me, and it kind of dealt with all the changes that came. Cut to 2019, I went on maternity leave at the brink of this whole thing that was going to start. It was this oblivion of, completely being oblivious to what was going to come, and I ended up spending my leave in a weird limbo of basically I was glad to be home, but also just really weird. And so I came back to this changed world. I know I'm not alone in this, and you've all had different experiences of similar types with different contexts. So now I'm a mother to a toddler, and there's really no greater reset to all of this than watching them discover the world, and also for us to explain the world to them, which gets challenging at times. And everything is so exciting for them. Everything is a discovery, every path is a possibility. And even as I revel in this personally, I know that this sort of wanes, this sense of wonder wanes as we age. This capacity for open-minded thinking and multidimensional thinking is something that goes away, and it's been researched where we know that there are studies that indicate, there are test groups of people or children under 5 who've scored a 98% genius score, whereas 5 years later they go down to 30, and only 5 years later, which is age 15, they're down to 10. So it's really quite interesting then when we look at educational systems and you look at Montessori, for example. This is the parent in me speaking. You can tell that these things have been founded on the principles of freedom and independence, and they really encourage people to go after curiosities one after the other. And somehow this stops after preschool, and our structures after that seem to reward us for being super consistent, building the ranks, and being very linear, when actually the world is constantly deconstructing and reconstructing itself. But this kind of makes sense too, because our quest for certainty is actually a survival instinct. We are, I think, hardwired to have our brains kind of quickly fill gaps and close anything that's a question. And we do this even in our meeting rooms every day, right? Like, how many times have you had to talk to stakeholders about waiting out and looking for more data or creating new solutions? And even as we're trying to push around this world, beginners mindset, I think it's extra hard on designers to resist the temptation to go to the obvious and really try to go out of our zone. So today I'd like to make the case for embracing the unknown by being a beginner again and again and again, and by really building it as a muscle intentionally. So brace yourselves, it's going to get quite personal from here. So I stumbled upon this not from my design practice, but actually from the kitchen. So in 2014, when I first moved to Berlin, I came here after a very long wait, going back and forth for the job. I moved lock, stock, and barrel with my husband, and 3 months later, the company decided to close its office, and we were all let go. It was a massive blow because I had no network here. I felt completely displaced and very vulnerable. And so much so that I just kind of shut down. I did not want to think about work anymore. Interestingly, this sort of shutting down helped me, because then I started to go into the kitchen and spend my time trying to find comfort in cooking. And this idea of starting to cook something, and something that's finished in an hour or two, and then you start again the next day, that was a really nice little compact challenge for me to do every day, which also set the tone for how I would understand being a beginner every single day. So slowly I started to play with my food, and as soon as I was in the kitchen all day, I would think about other things, other projects to work on. And at some point I decided I should probably document this, but of course as a designer, it always was about what's the end goal, what's the end purpose of it all. And after many monologue, I ended up creating a journal anyway, called Handful. And the first project I had on this was extremely personal. It was inspired by a set of photos my father took when I was a child in our hometown. He was standing knee-deep in the water and really helped, basically photographing me herding these paper boats that he made himself. And I wanted to create a souvenir out of it. So I thought, I'm a designer, and I obviously have an aesthetic sense, and I'm pretty okay with cooking. It can't go wrong, right? It's going to be great. And this is what I ended up with, which was basically my Pinterest fail meme, which really sort of brought my expert mindset down to my knees. And but something about this was so interesting, the mix of challenging and exciting, that I just kept going with it. And then I continued at it, and I came to a more presentable state. I think it took me a few weeks. It looks easy, but for me it was not. So I created this dessert in the end that was dipped in chocolate and put up on this dessert from my mother's kitchen, the rice pudding. And then from there on, I sort of went off and found whatever inspiration I could, and I worked on that. But for me, it became so interesting. Food as a medium was so exciting because it's so fundamental to us. It feels natural to work with it, but actually it's such a fickle medium. It's not that easy to mold it to what we want. But then also it's ephemeral. It's there 1 minute and then gone the next, and you have to start over again. So really, starting over for me every day became a form of therapy, and I really sort of needed it at that time. And while I was doing this, there's something else that sort of happened in the kitchen. The lack of good Indian food in Berlin, this was back in 2014, was insane. It drove me crazy. So my former boss, Thomas Kuber, at that time, and myself, we started this little supper club. Or we decided to start it basically serving Indian food with pairing it with German craft beer. And that was kind of a crazy thing to do because we knew nothing about it, but then we decided we're just going to put tables in my house and invite people. We didn't have a name, we didn't have a menu, but then we ended up selling out within an hour. And we made, I think, 30 euros in the end after like serving 9 courses, not because we knew what we were doing, but because we didn't know what we were doing. And similarly, the second dinner, we ended up spending money out of our pockets, which was just not, it was clear we were not business people. But something was so exciting about it, we just kept going, and we continued to do things around festivals, and other cuisines that I've tasted in India, which you would probably not find here at all. And so at this time, I suddenly realized this seems like a mini product on my hands, like thinking about how we work in companies and feeling like, what should we do with this? What did I really want my guests to take home? It's not just food, right? So it became a form of reflection at that point. Every time I did this, I was reflecting on this differently. So while I pondered this question, what actually came out of it, and which was so much more rewarding, was the fact that it was this community that was getting built around it, the people and the conversations, and it didn't really matter that we didn't have a name or we were like nobodies in a way. And these living, breathing sort of social events, they had a life of their own every time. We were free to reinvent ourselves every time. So every time we opened one, it was a new location, a new concept, a new menu. And we didn't really have to stick to anything. So it was really an opportunity for us to experiment every single time. And so this also was another sort of metaphor for how to constantly surprise myself in trying something new. So this is images from about 4 years of supper clubs. Coming to a close now. Yeah, so 4 years and 14 dinners, that's what we had. We learned so much from it. I personally learned how to make your manager cut onions for you. I'm just joking. But that was, the biggest lesson was really about people and our need for like being together. And how we ended up starting this tradition, because I just kind of missed mine. And it's also just humbling to see, people will show up someplace and sometime because for something. And it's the same here right now, which is really amazing, so thank you for that. So starting over became a form of exploration at this point. And then I started to think about this Indian saying, it's called Annadatta Sukhi Bhava, which means you have deep respect and gratitude for the one that feeds you. And in working with all of these people and feeding people, I started to gain an appreciation for everyday heroes down the street, or in places I've met abroad, basically, serving me food or coffee or whatever it was. And I started also doing some photo shoots for small female-run studios. And after a decade of being away from graphic design, I sort of also came back to that, and just really, not as a practice, but really like, how do I give back my skills? And it was interesting because I was not a photographer or a writer, but somehow the journey just kept giving me the courage to just keep taking on everything. And so it became a way of relating for me. And this sort of journey started when I was too tired to start over in design, where I should have probably gone looking for jobs. But I ended up starting over in another place where I didn't even bat an eyelid, and I just did it. And so I really think there's something to the power, the power of being naive and the power of naivete in all of this. And cut to 2020, I came back to work. I realized I'm actually new at too many things to deal with right now. The one is I was a new mother, new to the pandemic, new to being out of office for that long, and then trying to come back and see like what to do now. with this world. And then new at figuring out my own practice, which had to be tailored for my new reality after 18 years of having worked full-time. So I just wanted to like go through basically what is, I was trying to go through for myself, how do I overcome these new unknowns and uncertainties, and how do I move forward? And for me, just looking at that setback helped me sort of reframe it for myself. So I just wanted to share what are the few little thoughts that came across. So one of them was the first response is usually shock. What in the world just happened? Any huge change gets us into this shock mode. But for me, what helped was turning my attention to a challenge that preserved my optimism was something that was very, very helpful. In a time of crisis, it's really, really hard to keep your optimism up. And so I think like moving away from that was actually a good thing. And that makes sense because you actually do need a stupid amount of confidence to then like forge forward in something that you've never done before. And then, of course, the common question, like, where do I start? I don't know where to even begin in the middle of all of this. I would say start anywhere where you feel enthusiastic, because this became the fuel for me to keep going. So going from exploring something, I just wanted to keep on exploring. So the more I did it, the more I wanted to do. And yeah, so that's the fuel that can keep you going. And then there's the thought of failure, right? Like, this is scary, and there's enough to deal with already. And I think this sort of idea of turning around uncertainty on its head is feels very mystical. But what helped, for me anyway, was removing the outcome from the equation. I mean, this is not about, I don't know, a sprint or something at work. This is really about like helping yourself in that situation. So I think removing the outcome from the situation was very, very helpful. And also because that allows you to like remove any preconceived notions, and you can actually change paths as you will. And then, of course, this need to make it make sense to the world. I had a lot of questions. What are you doing? Are you changing a profession? And not everything has to be about a huge career shift, of course. But also, it was just getting hard to articulate what it is that was happening. But I didn't know what to do with it, and I just left it. But I feel that worked in my favor because I didn't have any pre-notions or any boxes to check, really, and just kept going from there. So not everything needs a name. And finally, am I moving away from the stuff I'm already good at? That doesn't sound wise. So the beauty in starting over is that you're never really starting over, not now anyway, because I think everything does connect in the end. Of course, it's great to approach it with the naivety, but have faith that in the end it will come back in a different way. So for me, what happened was while I was trying to understand for my guests, how might I create a better understanding of Indian food for my non-Indian guests here in Berlin, it really framed design for me. Which was how might I create a better understanding of design for my non-design colleagues. And I think this thing that was happening on the side really like shaped my own work, from being a designer as maker to designer as facilitator to designer as lead, really trying to like go beyond the role I was already at 4 years ago. So cooking it's really amazing because it's the single most fundamental thing that of creativity that you're going to do every day, and we have to eat 3 times a day, so there's work to be done, for sure. But now, 8 years later, I'm putting these lessons to work and trying to figure out how to use this again. So while I was preparing for the talk and thinking about like, how do you actually try to be a beginner every single time? What does that really mean? I came across this diagram, which is basically about personal development, moving from your comfort zone, facing your fears, and then breaking out to learning, and then finally growth. So I propose that this should actually be a cyclical process where we start from comfort, fear, learning, and growth, and really in a way that we keep doing this over and over again, you get comfortable with being uncomfortable and being really vulnerable. The fear factor actually just sort of dissipates. And then it becomes really simple. It's really start somewhere where basically find your sandbox of what is this challenge that makes you feel like stupidly confident. I think this is different for each person. It doesn't have to be the same thing. And use that as your personal sandbox to figure out how you work, basically, in the midst of uncertainty. And then play along with no outcome, but no agenda as well. But I think all this, even my own journey is all, it feels very good, but like how did I finally extract anything from it? Was basically by breaking down the last step, which is going from understanding the milestones, going to figuring out the observations from there, and then understanding the opportunities. And that created a picture for me of the kind of environment that I would thrive in, even in the midst of ambiguity. So I think this could be interesting, like, for teams as well, like just understanding how different people in a team work, because there are different parameters for different folks. So rinse and repeat, basically, like I said, we continue the cycle, so we get rid of the vulnerability that or the discomfort with the vulnerability that we have in this process. If you've read Joyful, this book by Ingrid Federle, she talks about the component of cycles in creating a sense of repetition, and that it brings back this wave-like quality of joy because you know what arrives when in this process. And so that's a great example of how that works. It's basically like when Christopher Robin asks Winnie the Pooh, what's your favorite thing to do? He says, what I like best. And then he had to stop and think, because although eating honey was a very good thing to do, there was a moment just before you began to, which was better than when you were, but didn't know what it was called. So as designers who have to dare every day to question our stakeholders, to chart new territories, to come up with new ideas, I invite you to celebrate this very moment, this plum moment of before all of it begins, again and again, with the wonder of a child, or in this case, Pooh. Thank you.